Really?
holiday. Yes.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
My husband's company is doing the same thing, which is kind of exciting. Like I've never worked in a place that does that. So he's very excited.
Yeah, I gotta find some ways to fill the time though. It's unique times right now, and so not the same things I would probably do.
Oh no, absolutely.
Definitely not.
Where are you located?
I actually live in San Francisco, but right now I'm in Richmond, Virginia.
Okay. There we go. So what brought you to Richmond?
My family. I'm born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a Southern girl.
I feel you. I've got family that is from Stanton. I think it's spelled Staunton, but said Stanton.
Yeah, we got a lot of places like that.
Yeah.
You're like, why is it pronounced this way? But isn't it really? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Real cute little town. We were there for a wedding like 4 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, Richmond is about an hour and 15 minutes outside of DC, and so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lived in Delaware for almost a year, and it was kind of surprising how often we ended up in another state on accident, but like we never made it all the way to Virginia. So. Of
course, you probably been in Philly a lot, or even Baltimore.
Yeah, we ended up in Maryland by accident trying to go get groceries once. And I was like, that sign said Maryland. Where are we? And we're like, I don't know.
It will happen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm getting us all set up here. It's 2:01, I realize, but we're going to wait about another 30 seconds or so, just in case people have trouble joining. Let's see here. And as we're getting all set up, in case you guys would like to, you're more than welcome to throw into the Zoom chat where you're calling in from. I'm always really interested to see how far our reach spreads on a given day. So you're more than welcome to do that if you'd like. And then we will kick off here shortly. All right, we are ready to go. So happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome. My name is Meg. I am part of the PowerToFly team, and I'll be your host for today. In case you've joined us for a previous chat and learn, the next about minute and a half is going to sound pretty routine and pretty kind of repetitive. But for anybody who is new to joining us, I just want to go over a couple quick housekeeping items and welcome you all, obviously. So today is all about our community. We absolutely highly value participation. To that end, if you would like to turn on your cameras so we can all see your lovely faces, you are more than welcome to. I know I, for one, definitely appreciate seeing new faces now more than ever. If you don't feel like your camera ready or you just prefer not to, that is totally fine. If you have any questions for our speaker today, or if you have any comments on what's being said, you are more than welcome to put that information into the Zoom chat. And if you have questions that you would like to raise directly to our speaker, you are more than welcome to come off mute and ask that, especially if you had written in a question previously and maybe want to add some more context or detail to the question. You are more than welcome to do that. The one thing we do advise is that unless you are actively speaking to our speaker today, or to me, you can address me as well, make sure you're on mute. That's just to prevent any kind of audio contamination. I will be doing the same thing because I've got 2 bulldogs sleeping within 4 feet of my desk, and nobody wants to listen to them snore through this entire thing. So you are also more than welcome, if you have a question that you'd like to be raised anonymously for whatever reason, you are more than welcome to message me privately. You can select my name from the drop-down menu in the Zoom chat, send it to me. I'll try and make sure, time allowing, and trying to fit in the question where it would fit in the course of our questions. I'll try and make sure that question gets raised anonymously to our speaker today. This is being recorded, so please don't feel like you have to take feverish notes or, oh, I didn't hear that, could you repeat that line, whatever. Anybody that registers for today's chat, whether you join us for 5 minutes or for the entire hour, will get an email with a link to the recording once the recording is live on our website. You can also check back on our YouTube channel. We are streaming live to YouTube right now, so if you want to check back on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the recording there much sooner. Let's see. And then if you did submit questions today, we have rearranged those into a more conversational format. And to that end, I'll show a couple slides with questions so that way you have some idea of what's going to be asked today. That way, if you have a question that might fit in really nicely with a certain area, you can hold it if you'd like, or again, feel free to float your questions whenever they occur to you. So to that end, I want to introduce our speaker today. Karita Merrill is an intrapreneur serving as Adobe's Diversity and Inclusion Talent Program Manager. She drives strategy around attracting and recruiting diverse talent into Adobe in tight partnership with key stakeholders, such as talent acquisition and branding teams, in addition to employee networks. Before joining Adobe, sorry, I'm tripping all over my words today. Before joining Adobe, Karita was Senior Manager of Science Education for UNCF, the nation's largest scholarship provider, where she co-managed UNCF's $48 million initiative, Fund 2 Foundation, for STEM Scholars Program, UNCF Merck Science Initiative, and the HBCU Innovation Summit. At UNCF, Karita has administered over $11 million in scholarship and leadership grants to over 700 historically underrepresented students. Beyond her current Adobe day job, Karita loves to paint and draw in her spare time. So welcome, Karita, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Is there anything that you'd like to add to that? It's a rather impressive.
You did great. Thank you, Meg. Thank you. And it's always unique seeing, I guess, the bio, right? I think sometimes we lowball ourselves and we're like, oh my gosh, we have accomplished a lot. So I'm like, oh, I get weird when folks read that, but thank you for that. I guess another thing I would add is that I'm born and raised in Richmond, Virginia. I'm actually in Richmond, Virginia right now. I usually live in San Francisco, working for Adobe, but at the onset of everything, I came to Richmond with my family, the onset of COVID-19. So Richmond, Virginia, if some folks don't know, it was the Confederacy capital of the South. And so you can imagine what life was like. And for that, I do identify as a strong Black woman.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. All right, so before we kick off with the questions for today, I do want to call attention to the fact that Adobe is part of the PowerToFly network. So if you have any interest in Adobe, I'm going to put the link to their company profile page in the chat, and I highly encourage you to follow them. It's how you can find out if Adobe has any new updates or if they're going to be participating in events like this, or further chat and learns, our virtual job fairs, that kind of thing. So please feel free to, oh, sorry, Carolyn's hearing my dogs humming in the background, they're snoring. That's the noise I'm gonna try and be preventing by muting myself consistently. So my apologies, Carolyn. So anyway, you can follow Adobe on PowerToFly. It keeps you updated if they have any new, like I said, any new updates that happen, if they were to post new roles or anything like that. I just highly recommend that you take a look at their profile page. So I will put that link into the chat in just a minute here. So I do have two screens real quick before we get to the questions. If you would like to take a screenshot of this screen and the next one, you're more than welcome to. Our type A joiners tend to like that. It'll give you an idea of the questions that we're going to try and touch on today. They are in slightly different order, so I do apologize for that inconvenience. I'm going to flip to the next slide in case you want to take a screenshot of the next page. And like I said, we will try to get to these questions. I know that 13 questions usually absolutely fills the hour, but audience participation is always encouraged. So if you guys have a further question that you would like asked, please feel free. And I, for one, love being interrupted. So if somebody else is talking, try not to interrupt another guest, but if I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. So Karita, to get us started here, this first question is, what is an intrapreneur? So can you help us understand this phrase for maybe somebody that's not familiar?
Yeah, and you can think of an entrepreneur as sort of like in parallel to what an entrepreneur is, but it is an employee that works for a company, essentially, that is basically assigned to special projects, building new ideas, building new initiatives, and just, being that sort of person inside of the company that is like a consultant to others, influencing stakeholders. And so that is essentially what my role is. I help build our diverse hiring strategy. And with that, I have to build new programming around that, figure out what partnerships we have to engage in, figure out what is our goal for that year, and making sure other stakeholders are aligned with that, or influencing how we hire and where do we hire. And so intrapreneur is just essentially that. You're building a new idea, you're building new products, and you're sort of bootstrapping internally.
Excellent. Thank you so much for clarifying that for our attendees today. So could you tell us a little bit more about your journey from nonprofit to tech? Because I think that this is a shift that a lot of people try and make, but it might not be very clear for everybody how that can sometimes look.
Yeah, and And to give you a little bit of background information, I joined Adobe about March 2018, a little over 2 years ago. And I moved from Washington, D.C., where I worked at UNCF that Meg mentioned, which is United College Fund, which is a nonprofit. Um, a little bit of how I got to there, right? I think it's important to understand, the background information and why it is my passion, right, to work in organizations like this and disrupt. And so it really starts from my childhood. When I was born and raised in Richmond, Virginia, my mom was a single parent, raised me while she was going to a historically Black college and university. We had to move around about 5 times, and I went to about 7 different schools just so I can get a quality education. I had to code switch as we were moving up, and she was progressing her career, moving into middle class neighborhoods, and sometimes I was the only one in my classes or the only one in my summer camps or Girl Scout camps. And so I started seeing early on the disparities and the wealth gaps, and that things were just not fair, and that my mom had to work harder than a lot of other folks and to make sacrifices just so I can gain a quality education. And so when I went to undergraduate in Richmond, Virginia, Virginia Commonwealth University, I stayed close to home. I joined so many student organizations and multicultural councils, such as like our Activities Programming Board, Fashion Week Committee, Welcome Week, and all these different program organizations in undergrad where we were able to create activities for the larger campus. My campus with 30,000 plus students. And back then I didn't realize that was diversity inclusion work, right? You're trying to figure out what the large and large student base wants to actually have, right? Whether it's concerts, whether it's all these amazing activities if it's veterans or anything that's multicultural relations. And so because of that, I went to grad school, and I knew I couldn't afford to go to grad school, but I wanted to have a fellowship. And so I was able to get a fellowship from George Mason University with our student activities department, where I was a graduate advisor to students that were programming events like I did in undergrad. And so I continued to realize that my passion was continue to bring opportunities of exposure to undertapped communities, right? In essence, trying to figure out how we can shift this wealth gap. And then I went to work at UNCF, United College Fund, and I started custom crafting some programs with a lot of folks. And that continued to be my passion, right? I am driven by my passion, not always, and that aligns where I'm going with the mission of the company. And so I had this sort of goal of that I work in all different types of industries, from nonprofit to tech. And so it kind of was organic as I started to build new programming for UNCF and aligning with tech. I started making sure I promoted myself a lot more on LinkedIn. I connected to the right stakeholders. I had a circle of trust, a circle of what do we call like a board of directors that have helped me, right? Try to figure out how I can move from nonprofit to tech. And I think that when it's the right time, I decided it's okay, it's time for me to make this shift. I did a lot for my previous organization, but I peaked. And I just worked my butt off, right? I worked my butt off a lot again and started building my brand and making sure I had different types of resumes and that folks saw my resumes, making sure I got referrals. And it really was how I was able to make that shift to tech. They saw that I was an entrepreneur and could build new ideas. So that's a long story, but that's a little bit more insight. And it is to know that life is not linear. You may apply to so many different companies while you're in a nonprofit, but other things you can do is also volunteer for initiatives, right? And put yourself out there and go to conferences. Go to conferences like PowerToFly has.
Thank you for that. And honestly, I think that you're right. Like it feels like a lot to go through, especially if you're trying to like lay it all out. But there's so many times we get asked things about like people's career arcs or their career journeys. And I feel like so many people get that feeling like they should have an arching plan, right? Like everybody else seems to. But it's always helpful, I think, for me, and I know our audience usually says the same thing, that to be able to be told, no, this isn't, I didn't have a plan. I sort of did this, and then I, had this issue, so I encountered this, so I changed, and blah, blah, blah. It can be very helpful to pull back that curtain and make sure people are aware that we're all doing this for the first time. So if you don't have a plan, it doesn't mean that you can't end up someplace. It also doesn't mean that, that you don't know where you're going. So
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So I know this question was one you were pretty eager to tackle. This person wrote in, once people are awakened to the idea of systemic racism and companies are ready to work on making things better for Black employees, are there pragmatic steps or activities that can be recommended? I appreciate that steps will vary for each organization. Is there a corporate success story people can look to?
Yeah, and thank you for that. There's, I guess, no one corporate success story. There are probably multiple, right? This right here is actually a new frontier with a lot of organizations, the social unrest, the racial injustices that are going on right now. And so because of that, our diverse inclusion teams, our companies are building new diverse inclusion crisis manuals, crisis framework, and it's in real time. You have to know that. We are definitely working in overdrive. I think some of the first initial steps you can do is make sure you create a safe space for your Black employees, right? A safe space where they can grieve, a safe space where they can talk to one another, where there's not always allies in that particular channel, but it's for them. And so you can do that by either Slack. I know it's hard in our virtual environments. Create Slack channels, create Google groups, right? Provide EAP resources. So what is that? Therapy resources for your Black community, and make sure that they have that, and provide it for other folks as well, because we're all grieving. We're all trying to figure this out right now. And then second, you need to make sure you work with your Black leaders, and those are very active within the Black community of the organizations, and figure out what their needs are, right? Build sort of a framework or pillar strategy. At Adobe, we've been working very closely with our Black Employee Network, our CEO, and our head of HR, and building a 5-pillar strategy. And that's around growth and advancement, hiring and recruiting, community and advocacy, where we're thinking about various things, right? Maybe there's a new social justice frontier that we need to add to our strategies. What are we looking at around hiring and recruiting? And then we also make sure that we're going out in the community and provide resources, right? Working with organizations like NAACP Legal Fund or Equal Justice Initiative. So I just want to go back on that. It's a lot of things you can do. So that's number one, make sure you provide a safe space for your Black employees, connect with your Black employees and leaders on really how to build a framework to drive change. And it has to be inclusive of them, because if you don't include the folks that are oppressed at the table, then how are you going to create significant change, right? And then number three, make sure all stakeholders are involved. The business partners, HR reps, right? They have the resources on how to chat with employees on allyship. They have resources on how to work very closely with the Black employees, listen to their needs. And you also have resources for leaders. So I've been training a lot of our teams, like all hands requests and team meetings, on just having conversations about racism. Teaching those folks what is the sentiment of our Black employees and how they're feeling. And I'm getting very real with it. Providing individuals with a brief history on US racism. I make sure I have slides in that deck. I make sure I also share ways that Adobe is supporting the Black community at Adobe. And then also what employees can do. And one thing I think that companies can do, if you can, set up a intranet, right? A sort of inside your company page on ways they can support the Black community and how to handle sort of one-on-one interactions and team meetings, right? It's very uncomfortable what's going on a lot for people, right? But you have to make sure you don't operate business as usual. You have to reach out to those employees that are affected and ask how they're doing first. You have to lead with empathy during this time. And so that was all a lot, right? And so I'm sure folks can go back on the recording and jot down some notes. But there's so many ways. But again, it's just really building a sort of D&I crisis manual and see what other companies are doing right now. I think Levi sent out a great 4-step strategy on what they're doing. Reebok has added some stuff. Nike. There's so many other organizations that are doing things like that and seeing it on LinkedIn, but you can see it on LinkedIn or social media. And you also, when you develop a company statement about social injustices, back it with some actions. Just don't put a statement out there, and try to back it with sustainable actions and inform the community over time what you're doing, because these are your customers. Your customers are watching what's going on right now. Yeah.
Thank you for calling all that out.
Yes.
And I know it's a lot to go over because it was a very big question, really.
Yes.
And I think you're absolutely right. Lead with empathy to start with. And then, yeah, the bit about action, honestly, hugely important. And to be fair, I think it was really nice that you called out companies that are doing it right. I feel like in certain respects, it's just as important to see what companies are doing that is not right, so that you know what to avoid. You can try and see well, that didn't sit really well with me. I see, as somebody who's maybe not part of that company, but as a consumer of whatever brand it is, that seems a little tone deaf, or that seems a little false, or whatever. So that when you're doing these things for your company internally, that way you have kind of a roadmap of what to do and what to avoid.
Yeah, yeah, you have to. It's that whole DNI crisis manual. You just have to, like, we have crisis manual in general, right? Crisis management teams, but you need to create a DNI crisis manual. It's all even down to how moderators will look at chat pods and look at the angst that may be coming up in Slack or different channels that you have, right? You need people there to make sure that things aren't bubbling up too much and that folks have the resources they need, such as even therapy resources. It's so many different parallels you just have to work on in work streams.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's move on to our next question here. This person wants to know, what is your favorite thing about working at Adobe?
Yeah. I mean, it's gonna be cliche, right? I love the people. I love our community. I love our Black employees. I love our OLA employees. I love everyone that's part of our employee networks because there's such a huge family that wants to drive change. Um, and I just love all the ideas and momentum, right? But one of the biggest things I love about working for Adobe is that next week I have the entire week off, even though we're in a virtual environment. It's called a company summer shutdown. And so we get two things like that. We get one in the fall for around the holidays in the US, and then one in the summer. And so next week I'll be just sitting in my mom's backyard in an inflatable pool, just chilling for the entire week, no work. And so I think that's the biggest thing about what what I love about Adobe, the time off that we get and the work-life balance.
And that is honestly so huge, especially now when, after we've seen all these people start to move to a remote work life that maybe hadn't experienced it before. It's incredibly important to recognize that work-life balance and to realize that, even if you're like, not necessarily furloughed, but if your business is not picking up at this time, a lot of people feel like they're working more than they ever have. And even personally, like, I've worked remotely for a year and a half now, and the last 3 or 4 months have been a little more difficult because I'm always home and I'm always I'm always like right by my office, but there's more, it seems like there's more pressure to be very productive or to be getting things done. And so it feels less like you get to have that separation, like that true separation from work. So that's a very important call out.
Thank you.
And there's a ton of people that are very, very, very jealous of your planned shutdown and your plans for your planned shutdown.
I mean, hey, if you got any ideas what I should do in my mom's backyard, just hit me, send it in the chat pod. I'm looking for ideas, crowdsourcing.
Excellent. All right. So this next person had asked, how do you balance the knowledge and responsibility of being a role model for others who follow in your path with the fact that you're a real person and not a symbol or an ideal? And I feel like this is becoming more and more important as we have people who are being groundbreakers, even if even all you're doing is diversifying a team or bringing a different perspective to a specific team, maybe not the company as a whole. But that can be a really hard line to walk, of thinking like you have to set some kind of example when really, like we talked about earlier, you're a person and you're doing all this for the first time. You might not have an overarching plan of where you want your career to go, and yet you have that odd sense of responsibility that people might be looking up to you or trying to follow in your path.
Yeah. Thank you for that. This is a real question, right? Like, I deal with it all the time. And I think it's along the lines of almost imposter syndrome, if you think about it, right? So there was no roadmap really I had when this role was created. And so I had to figure it out in real time what to do, right? How to handle the requests that came in, how to handle, like when I first started, there was so much need for this sorry, oh, I can't talk either, that people were reaching out to me constantly and I couldn't even balance my workload and balance what my scope was going to be. And so I had to figure out just how to balance that. And I do sometimes struggle. I think sometimes people think I am, you know, I have all this power to create change because of the role, but really is that I'm trying to figure things out along the way they are, right? I have the power to influence and continue to influence and over again, but I can't make like real time decisions. And so it is a balance, right? Sometimes I just tell people, look, I understand where your input, I understand your frustration, I understand that you want change, but let's work together in parallel on how we can have a phased approach to create change. And that change does not happen overnight. Let's start some sort of pilot. Let's start a trial and figure out if this works out with this particular group. And then we go to folks with that research and data and be like, hey, this worked. You got to use it now. So it is hard, but I do have to set some boundaries and level set. And it takes time. It took me maybe about a year to build trust because it was a new role.
I think the bit about boundary setting is something we don't hear often enough. I think it's very responsible of you and very healthy for yourself. So thank you for calling that out, because I think it's not really touched upon enough, I don't think, in maybe people's training of how to function in a professional capacity.
Yeah.
It's quite all right to have limitations. It is quite all right to say, you know what, I'm not today. Tomorrow, not today.
Yeah, I said that. I was like, hey, I'm going to reply back next week. I am not going to reply now. So, yes. And I say, hey, I have an influx of requests right now. Is this urgent? If it's urgent, then we definitely can find 15 minutes to chat. But also therapy. Therapy is good. My mom is a mental health therapist, so I talk to her all the time.
Yes, I will second and third the therapy. I think we had an earlier chat a couple of weeks ago with Ariel Zwang, who had spoken to us about mental health, and it was amazing, very very vulnerable, and it can be very scary. But that idea that you need to handle this all yourself, we have to make it a thing of the past. We have to make it something that you are able to lean on other people, especially somebody whose literal whole job is to try and help you and help people, better handle what's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
All right. So this next question asks, do you have any tips for being assertive without automatically being seen as aggressive and disregarded? The tips commonly given to white women don't usually take into consideration the sadly common stereotype of the sassy Black lady.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thank you for that stereotype. Right. I think it's a much better. I think that's keeping it very tame. But the stereotype that sometimes Black women get is being an angry Black woman. Because when we, sometimes I feel like I have to work harder than my counterparts. And when I work harder, it comes off as us being, like you said, aggressive and disregarded. So one thing I simply do is that when I first got to any organization I go to, I set up listening tours. I set up meetings with folks just to learn about how their job is going and what has been successful. So when I first got there, I started each meeting off with my stakeholders I wanted to influence or work closely with. I start off with their successes first. I said, what has been successful about your role? What are some good things that, you've done? Like, what have been amazing? And then I said, well, how do you feel like you can change and enhance or improve? And that way they seem like you're not attacking and you're being defensive, because with my role in diversity inclusion, we're probably seeing like these sort of detectives or police, right? Diversity inclusion detectives. And so that's how I start things off, right? Like trying to build a rapport with that person and getting to know them on some sort of personal level if they are comfortable with that. And I walk the halls, when we were able to go outside. I would walk the halls in bright colors and just say, hey everyone, what's going on? What's going on? And now I do that on Slack, right? I try to set up some challenges and engagements just so people know who I am. Like in our Black Employee Network, start out challenges like, what's your favorite shoe? Like we had a shoe game challenge. The other day we had a hot sauce challenge. Last week we had a grits challenge. How do you like your grits, salt or sugar? I'm Team Salt, by the way, and Team Salt won. So I just want to shout that out. If any of
you start a war.
Yeah. So I make sure people know who I am in a friendly way, but also make sure, that level set that I mean business. So I think you just have to set things up and not going off into the defensive first and saying, look, we need to change. You're not doing this right. Talk about their success first and then ways they want to enhance.
I think that's an excellent way to put it, because there's a lot of times people make suggestions like, well, just let them know you're on the same team. Mm-hmm. That's not always easy to do. And it's not a very clear directive for people. And, full disclosure, I was, 27 before I ever heard the phrase Black tax ever in a work environment. Yeah. And it's one of those things that you don't know what somebody else is facing at work. You don't know what somebody else is going through until you talk to them about it. But I think we're in this situation where people are being not necessarily forced to open up, but they're forced to open their eyes and look around and realize you don't know everything and that everybody's experience is not going to be just like yours. So that one size fits all approach to, well, just let them know you're on the same team. Like, no, that's not real helpful. So I think, thank you for that really actionable idea of saying, okay, well, where are your successes? Because any team people like to talk about their job, especially when they've done well.
They want some shine. Yeah.
Genius.
Give them some shine. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
And just to layer onto that, I think in this virtual environment right now, and in a sense of what's going on with our racial injustices, is that if you do ask someone in the Black community what's going on, if you want them to educate you about the history, I think don't do that right now. They may come off. I know myself like, well, why don't you just Google, right? And don't get brushed off by that. It's just that again, that Black tax and what we've been going through. We are right now. We are grieving ourselves, and so you can do the onus in yourselves to educate yourself about what's happening with history and racism.
Exactly. I think that's very important to call out, is that as much as people want to connect with, with their coworkers or with their friends or whatever, like you had said before, lead with empathy and try and do for yourself everything you can before you put any sort of ask or lift or anything that is not, that's not like a work task. Like that's just not, it's not appropriate. And even if it comes from a place of concern and a place of wanting to know and learn and whatever, like think about the other person's reaction before you make that step, just so you can not just make yourself feel better, so that you can make, that you can actually learn and be better.
Yeah, certainly.
All right. So this person had asked along the same lines, how can you best support your Black colleagues in tech when you are not in a leadership position? Can you share some personal experiences around how allies have supported your career advancement?
Yeah. Goodness. Yes. Let me get into that particular question. Those two questions. And so I think one thing you can do to best support your Black colleagues is maybe mentorship or sponsorship, right? Sponsorship is a little bit better. I know you're not, if folks say they may not be in a leadership position, but maybe you're still in some sort of position of power, of influence. And so what if you're in a promotion meeting or there's promotion period that's up for folks? Have the folks that have you noticed that hadn't been promoted in a while or new and say, hey, can we put this person on some sort of succession plan? Can we make this for our undertapped community? Because I think they're getting overlooked, right? Just elevate those folks when you're in these meetings and they're not in there and that you're in some sort of position of power, of influence. I think that's a big thing. I saw even an example. This is not a career advancement. It's just a support. In one of our Slack channels yesterday, our Black Employee Network Slack channel, there's an ally in there that's supporting someone from the Reddit community that is trying to get a new digital iPad, I believe, a Black digital artist who's new. And, in order he wants to support him, he put something on our Black Employee Network channel like, hey, I'm commissioning some portraits. Submit your portrait you want now. If you click +1, I'll pay for it for this individual to create something for you, right? And that way he's helping out that our employees feel better, but he's also helping out that person externally that wants to become a digital artist and give them support so they can help them. So I think just thinking about all these organic ways, right, of you can do things, right? Maybe if you notice that someone's in a community and there's, they can't get to access to maybe a grocery store or some sort of tool, maybe create some sort of exchange system in your organization where you can help folks out, right? Maybe there's some sort of skill set exchange. Maybe there's stretch projects that you have that are under your belt that you can help someone out and give them access to. And that can help them get noticed too, right? As well. And I think maybe how some folks have helped in my career advancement. It's so many, right? I guess, and maybe this is around allies. I guess when folks send notes to my manager, right, about all the great things that I'm doing, or they send emails and they CC my manager on there, I think that is an amazing thing to do, because if they continue to get so many of those, and you can even like crowdsource almost internally, like, hey, I want to get X person promoted. Let's all do something internally and send a whole bunch of notes to that manager about them. I know for me, when I have some of our employees involved in some of our recruiting events, I send manager letters of support to those folks. So it'll be a letter that talks about all their excellence, what they did with that event, and then I'll make sure I include that manager and I CC that person that was involved. That probably goes over a long way. You just never know. So.
That is a great idea. I love the idea of sort of crowdsourcing. Not only crowdsourcing support like for the digital artist, like you had said, but I love the idea of saying like, hey, if somebody does a particularly good job on something, don't just tell that person, tell that person's supervisor. It's I feel like it's one of those things that people don't really think about that often. And I certainly didn't think about like kind of team appreciation stuff until I came to PowerToFly. And they're all, granted, we're all over Slack and we've been remote this whole time. So that's more of a thing for us. We have an entire Slack channel that's literally just team appreciation. So not only are you shouting out that person, but you're doing it in a public channel that anybody else can, pile on and say, yeah, this is great, or this person also helped me with such and such, or whatever. And it makes for it's a good feeling for everybody. Honestly, it's not something that you should just do for Black employees, but you should absolutely make sure that you make this a priority.
Yeah. We do it sometime in some meetings. We'll have, hey, let's talk about our successes of our teams. My manager does that in one of our staff meetings, and I loved it. We use the idea that she's had in like some of our employee network meetings with leadership. We'll put up a slide about all these great things that folks are doing that we recognize from somewhere. And we have Slack channels like that too, appreciation. I am like famous for putting in some of the Slack channels like, hey, shout out to Meg for helping out with this. You go, girl. And all these likes get on there, and it makes them feel good too.
Yeah, absolutely. Who doesn't like to get compliments? I mean, especially when it's about something like a good job you did at work. Like there's always that chance that you're sort of uncertain about like, who else is really impacted by that report you wrote or whatever. But yeah, I think that's a lovely way to start. We did have one question that was asked anonymously. If you would prefer to think on it and we can come back to it later, that's totally fine. This person said, what questions do you want white colleagues to ask you about your experience as a Black person at work? In what environment is the best way for these conversations to happen? A structured corporate supported workshop, casual lunch? How should you make this happen for those that might need these conversations most? I think she means like your Black coworkers that might need these conversations most and may not feel comfy approaching or even know of any Black colleagues. So this can be a very loaded question, and I apologize if this is not where you wanted this conversation to go. I'm more than happy to, we can revisit this at a later point, or we can send out something later on. But I thought it was a very important thing to ask.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about some of that now. And I think there's like a second part of that, like, should it be in team settings or one-to-one? So one thing that we did at Adobe, we created like a manager guidelines, but it's really people guidelines for everyone can use, whereas how to have one-to-one interactions and how to facilitate team settings. And so you can set up that chart right there, right? And there's so much information in Google, you can search that about how to handle things right now. It has stuff on there like, have a simple question, like ask them how their day is going if you're in one-to-one interaction. How's your experience been at X company? How can I help? Sometimes asking how can I help can be a little bit loaded. So if you aren't comfortable with doing that, by any means, don't do that. Maybe you get some ideas from when they're seeing how their experience has been at that company, when you can start brainstorming ideas with them. But some things, again, you just maybe not want to say is when you're having some of these sessions that please do not say, I do not see color or all lives matter. I always want to put that as a big emphasis because what you're doing is not honoring my heritage or the heritage of that person that is Black or brown, right? What essentially folks are saying is that we just want Black lives to matter, right? And have equal rights as everyone else. And so it's as simple as that. And so I can come back to answering more of those, but again, I think you have to start creating your own chart of do's. And even maybe some don'ts that you want to have of how to handle one-to-one interactions in team settings, right? Because it will come up. You can have maybe an HR business partner helping facilitate some of those discussions. I work with our HR business partners on facilitating discussions on racism. Like we start ours off with a moment of silence first. Then we have Adobe statement. Then the second slide is the sentiment. Third slide, is a sentiment of our Black employees. And I weave in a little bit of stories of my personal reflections of me just being Black, right? When I first realized that being Black was a problem was when I was in kindergarten. I also talk about my personal safety and say that I have to make sure I'm running outside in bright colors because I don't want to get killed like Ahmaud Arbery or Trayvon Martin. I say things like that. Then I go into, again, the US history slide, and then I go into things, actions each employee can take. And after we have those, then we set a discussion for that team, maybe it's a small team interaction or a large team. We have them sort of, the business partner maybe will ask us things like, hey, how did this conversation make you feel? Very light, right? And then that sets up things that folks may say, like, I didn't realize it was that bad. I'm so sorry. I'm here to support everyone and figure out ways we can work together in solving this issue. Those are some things you can do. Ask for external facilitator if you need that to discuss racism. but it can be in various forms, right? But I think you can start off small with some of your ERGs and, and talking about it with someone from your business partner. Yeah.
And I just want to call out, because I believe this person that posed this question is most likely white,
Yes.
or they're at very minimum not an African-American,
Yes.
not a Black, not a member of the Black community.
Yeah.
But just like we keep saying, lead with empathy, don't make demands.
Yes.
And I lead with, I'm here if you need anything. If you don't want to talk about this, that is perfectly fine. Because not everybody wants to talk about these kinds of things at work. Not everybody feels comfortable or safe enough to, despite saying this is a safe space or something like that. So it's very important to remember that and to be respectful to a fault. I mean, to a certain extent, act as though there's a death in the family, because people are grieving right now. They are having a lot of things going on, and like grief, there's no one way to do it. So it's very important to be respectful of each individual. So thank you for sharing that with us, Karita.
Thank you.
All right, on to our next question. What are some things to keep in mind when creating these safe spaces at work for Black tech employees?
Yeah. Set rules of engagement, even like 1, 2, 3. See things like, hey, this space is created for our Black employees, by our Black employees, and it discusses Black culture. So respect that space. I think it's certain things you can set up these rules of engagement. Make sure, again, you lead with empathy. There's no like sort of trolling or discord you can say in here, and that we want to continue to uplift the community. So I think that's essentially what you have to do. Set up rules of engagement first and create different types of activities, whether it's some sort of a therapist that comes in and has a group discussion with individuals, whether it's just an open forum for folks to talk about how they feel. And then also maybe something around wealth building, right? Like, talk about stock. I think one of our employees, our Black employees, our leaders, she's created a session on how folks can get stock and our employee stock exchange program, right? Because we want to, again, the goal is to build wealth. And set up some fun stuff, right? You want to keep the environment uplifting. But number one is definitely set up rules of engagement, because you can probably see an uptick in allies join these respective spaces, and they can join, right? But you want to make sure you have a rules of engagement. Yeah.
And I think the one thing it like caught in my head a little bit, and I didn't really process it until you were in the middle of this explanation, unfortunately, is when people talk about them not being, maybe you're not in a leadership role at work, just because you're not in a leadership position does not mean you don't have any sort of power or authority. Even just by like dean of being a white person, or being a male, or being a longstanding member of that department maybe, or a longstanding employee, you have influence, you have power, whether you really recognize it or not. So setting that example and making sure that it's known, like you're an ally, you will not stand for things like off-color things to be said in your presence, or you will question if somebody makes a questionable statement or decision or whatever. Standing firm on those things, respectful but firm, goes a long way to helping other people feel like they are not alone, no matter where they fall within different minority groups or whatever their intersectionality looks like. It's very important that you make it known that you are, like, you can be a safe space, because even if people don't take advantage of that or don't like take you up on it, it's important that you make that known, so that people knowing that they're not alone is very important.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Just doing my best.
Thank you. And there's so many things to consider when you're creating safe spaces for Black employees, and just know some things will happen in real time that probably you didn't expect to happen. So just think about some responses that you can have to support folks, right? If things do come up.
Yep, and we touched on this a couple times with past chats we've had with Mariella and Deanna over the past couple of weeks. I'm happy to send people links to those chats if you'd like. But it never hurts to practice saying the phrase, "I'm sorry, that did not come out the way I intended. Can I restate that?" Or, "I'm sorry, I did not realize that was offensive. I won't say that again. Thank you for telling me." Being able to say that you were wrong, now you know better, now you're going to do better, is not something all of us are comfortable with, because it might not be something that you've had to say a lot. Practice it. It's not hard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so for this next question, this person wants to know, how can I help my company start a diversity and inclusion program initiative?
Mhm. Yeah, and that's a lot, right? It depends on the size of a company. That's a lot. I think some of the initial things I would do, I would survey the employees first to see where they want to see with diversity inclusion. It's thing to create a strategy, right? But you want to create a strategy with input and make sure there's buy-in. And so use like tools like Culture Amp, if you can, to create a survey around, what is the health of diversity and that cultural experience at the company. That is the first thing you want to do. And then from that, aggregate some of those responses, figure out what are the themes of it, and then figure out how to build your strategy. I think some of the biggest things you want to do first is talk about, to include that strategy, is how you can train the next generation, right? Because you want to make sure you have successors for the company. That is a big thing I think you should put in one of your strategies. And then once you figure out what that strategies is, if you have employee resource groups or if you have employees that are very active, present that to them first for input on these. And then build some sort of inclusion summit where everyone can come together with different tracks about how to be better leaders, how to be inclusive leaders. And then as you're building your strategy, make sure you work with your stakeholders on various teams like talent development, right? Because that's where you have the retention and inclusion part. Make sure you work with your insights team to get data, right? Because you're gonna have to make sure you have good data to share. And then make sure you work with your recruiters and your talent acquisition team, and they have some sort of say in this process and they're involved in this. Because it's very important that they have some sort of say into that again, so they feel like they're being valued and their input matters, and they have streams that are under that D&I strategy, right? And I think I think that's the biggest thing first to start with, is surveying to get the help of the company, making sure you promote this and present it to stakeholders, and then get a team going. So I hope that's helpful. Does that answer, Meg? Some good insights?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I've also put a couple links in the chat in case anybody's interested to past chats that we've had that had more focus on subjects like this, like starting a D&I program at your own company. So thank you to everybody that's asking for details on things like this.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, this person wants to know, how can I hold my company accountable for hiring diverse, underrepresented talent, especially in tech?
Yeah. Ask for the data. Just ask for the data, and that will drive all the discussions. Ask for different cuts of data, right? Ask for how many women are in technical roles or engineering role. Ask for how many Black employees or Hispanic or Latinx employees are in X number of roles, in management roles, right? I think it is going to be a little bit difficult in some ways, and as y'all know this, the US, we track ethnicity, but outside the US, you can't track ethnicity. So you just have to have that mindset that it's going to be hard to figure out what is the data look like outside of the country sometime, right? But that doesn't still mean that you can't drive diverse inclusion globally. You certainly can, right? Because you can just see if this is the representative maybe in the US, maybe it's the same and globally with our aspects of things, and make sure that your company has processes around these and strategies around the data, right? I think that's as simple what you can do. Yeah. Reach out to your leaders in your technical organizations, your talent organizations, and just ask for that data. And hopefully they can share that with you publicly. And then maybe things around talent development. Make sure you have some programs on professional development for employees, and even also mentorship programs and a career succession plan. That's how some things you can hold accountable, because if maybe the data is low, then say, okay, well, what's next on the strategy? Because I want to make sure that we bring folks back in to the company and that we actually retain them.
And you're right, the retention detail is honestly crucial. If you have people coming and going, no matter what demographics you're looking at, it's not a great sign for the company. But if you look at it in terms of a breakdown of demographics or of data, different data points and data sets, yeah, there's a lot more that you can do with that information to make real changes that will help, instead of trying to make a broad sweeping change that might not be as impactful as you'd like.
Yeah. And then ask them, why are people being filtered out of the pipeline? Is there a way that we can change our job descriptions? I think sometimes job descriptions are way too long, right? There are studies out there that if you see a long job description, people aren't going to apply for it. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, they self-select themselves out of it. Um, Look at things like that too. What's filtering people out, right? Because it's so much to say, well, here are the numbers. It's like, yeah, well, this is the reason why folks not get in. Well, what's the reason why you aren't letting them in the door?
Yep, this is
We
a
ask
huge
for
thing that we talk about. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, like are you asking for unicorns or dream employees, right? You want someone to have X number of years experience, have this long list, laundry list of technical experience, and then there's another list, and you're like, okay, I see why your pool is so small.
Absolutely. We have our head of D&I runs training programs on stuff like this, and we also do it with other PowerToFly client companies where they drill in on, okay, so you want A, B, C, and Z. Is there a reason you want Z? Is there any other way to phrase this? Do you think that the only way you get employees of a certain caliber is if they have Z on their resume? If that's not the case, and what you're trying to say is, well, I don't really need Z, I need WXY. Okay, then let's say that, because that might be a more, not necessarily more attainable, but like it's not going to be as small of a pool that you're then artificially self-selecting down to.
Yeah, definitely. And even location. Hopefully, with all these things that are going on right now, we have more and more companies going virtual and hiring remote employees.
Absolutely. And I will call out, because I do see some people talking about it in the chat. I know it's a very often quoted phrase, but I'm telling you guys, most women do not apply for jobs unless they have 100% of the qualifications. The quoted percentage of what they generally apply for varies depending on what source you've used and how new the data is. But keep in mind, if you have 100% of the qualifications for any job, you might be bored once you get there. And most men, generally speaking, apply for jobs when they have a little over 50 to 60% of the qualifications. So my rule of thumb is if there's 5 qualifications and you have 3, assuming that the other 2 are not something that you can't learn on your own or learn on the job, or not like, crucial to the performance of that job, apply. The worst they can say is no answer. Even no tells you something. So
yeah,
absolutely.
And one thing I mentioned earlier is what I used to do when I realized that, okay, maybe I should think of considering something outside of UNCF. I wasn't that typical millennial, right? I stayed at UNCF for 8 years and I loved it. I did a lot of things, right? A lot of things the organization, but I was like, okay, it's time for me to see how another organization works because I had my plan and I had went outside that plan. I stayed there for so long. And so I started meeting more with my friends and my board of directors and just asking about, what do you think I should go? What I should do? What type of role? And they already knew about what I can do professionally and that I was successful. And so they started just helping me. Yeah.
Very true. All right. So we do, we've about 8 minutes left in today's chat. We do have a question that came up in the chat. Somebody had asked, can you speak to strategies to promote Black people within the C-suite in roles other than D&I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think it's something that companies still figuring out, right? What is that? Because I think often we have, again, we want to have that unicorn for that certain C-suite position. So I think it's what you can do is start working close with your company and say, hey, do we really need someone to have this technical experience, to have this chief marketing officer experience from this X number of company? Do we really need that? It can be sort of adjacent company. And work with organizations, right, to promote the companies. So like Ad Color, work with like Executive Leadership Council, which is for, they have a C-suite track, right, on how to get more folks into executive positions, right? Get your company to sponsor folks for that. And it's the data again, right? It's the data. Also, too, making sure that company have Black and brown recruiters, executive search recruiters. Make sure your companies have those because they can speak to that particular person. And, as soon as they maybe executive recruiter sees someone out in that they're trying to get, they want to see someone that looks like them a lot of the time, right? There's so many things that folks are doing. And then making sure for certain roles that you have X number of folks that are being interviewed, right? That look like what you want to hire. You should put some sort of goal around that. And then hold others leaders accountable. I know a lot of companies are doing now aspirational goals around recruiting metrics for diversity employees, and they're holding leaders accountable with their bonuses, et cetera.
It can be honestly just as easy as hearing like, oh yeah, the company has plans and they're going to be trying to do such and such by such and such date.
Mhm.
Set a calendar alert in your calendar. Check up on those stats and just ask whoever is in D&I at your company, or ask whoever's in hiring at your company, like, hey, how are we doing on those goals? I'm really curious. And it's very beneficial, even if you are not within the non-dominant social group that they're talking about. If you're not part of the target audience that they're trying to reach out to and connect to,
Mhm.
it's important to ask these questions.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right, so this person had written in asking, are there branding changes companies can make to attract and hire more Black people in tech? And I think we talked about this a little bit when it came to how the job descriptions are worded and that kind of thing. But do you have anything to speak to, like larger initiatives like they're talking about, like a branding change?
Yes, yeah. There's so much more. You can work with companies like Blavity too to help figure out, right? They have like branding strategies and helping companies figure out things. You work with PowerToFly to give you exact advice on how to make sure you're promoting in the right aspects and employees you want to recruit. I work very closely with our talent marketing team. So let's say, for instance, we go out to conferences like Afrotech, Grace Hopper, or just any other conference like Black is Tech. I make sure that we showcase our Black employees and their stories are being shared about why they joined Adobe and why they think it's important for diversity in tech. And we promote that on social media about that conference. Like, hey, Allison is going to be at Blackest Tech Conference next week. Check out her journey, right? Here. And then hopefully it gets people to come out and learn about that. And when we're at these events or at these different partnerships, I make sure there are Black and brown faces that are representing that particular partnership, right? To talk about their experience. Because oftentimes when we go out there, you see recruiting, sometimes at fairs or events, you may not see anyone that looks like you. So why would you necessarily want to join? So it's things that like that needs to be changed. And even making sure we have events that cater to our different communities, right? What do people want to see? Do they want to see a I'm trying to say a dinner that honors Black creators, right? We can showcase that. And that is a way to brand the company, right? Because you're honoring your external audience and your clients. And in essence, maybe folks want to come there and work for you. So it's certain things like that. I work very closely with our talent marketing team to make sure that we have the right resources and have the right branding.
Absolutely. Second, the follow Blavity. I follow them on Instagram, and it's fascinating and very, very important and informational content there. So thank you for calling that out. All right, I think we've got time for one last question here. This person wants to know, what's the biggest thing you've learned while working in the D&I space?
The biggest thing is that, man, it's so much things, right? I guess the biggest thing is I've been learning more how to manage my calendar, manage my time, and set boundaries. I've also learned how to manage different types of personalities and how to work closely with those folks and getting ideas off the ground. Yeah, that is the biggest thing. Like, you know, just navigating different personalities, how to reply to people, how to, you know, just get them to influence and understand what my position is on things and initiatives that we're trying to drive. Yeah, navigating the politics is the biggest thing I'm learning.
One of my personal favorite questions to ask people is, what's one thing nobody ever asks you about your job, but you wish they did?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Um, hmm.
Anything from like a brag, or something surprising, or something they may not know. It's one of my favorite questions to ask people because they have the response you just had. But no, go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe it's about background. Do I have a degree in what I'm working in? Maybe that's something. Yeah. And I guess I should answer that. So no, I have a bachelor's of fine arts for undergrad, and I have my master's is in arts management focused on nonprofit organizations. So, yes.
Very nice. I have an art history degree that it's in mint condition if anybody else wants it. Never been used. So. All right. Well, in our last 2 minutes today, I'm throwing up a couple more of our links that we had shared previously into this chat. So in case anybody wants to look at those, I'm also including a link so you can check out some of our upcoming virtual events. Hold on, I'm gonna throw that in there right there. I just wanna say thank you very much to everybody who joined us today. I know it's, even in quarantine, like taking an hour out of your day is not always a given. So thank you for spending time with PowerToFly today. And then I want to extend a giant thank you to Karita. Thank you so much for joining us today, for tackling some very, very large questions, some of them unplanned for, so I very much appreciate that. And just thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with our community. It's very valuable to all of us, so thank you. All right, so before we go, oh, go right ahead, I'm sorry.
Thank you, I appreciate this.
Before we go, I just want to remind everybody, you will be getting a link to the rewatch of today's event. We'll also, you can feel free to share that link with anybody you like. They don't have to have been registered for today's event. Anybody is also welcome to check out, like I said, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. We are at PowerToFly. Much sooner, it'll be probably live on our website within about a day or two. And if you have further questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat. I'll try and get those addressed. And I've put in links, like I said, where you can check out upcoming chat and learns. You can connect and follow Adobe on their company page. And you can also connect with myself or with Karita on LinkedIn if you would like. So thank you so much. And Karita, is there anything you'd like to say to our audience?
So sorry, I unmuted myself. I said, it's been a pleasure, everyone, and thank you. And reach out to me for LinkedIn if you have any more questions.
Thank you so much, everybody. I will see. I'm hosting again tomorrow. We've got chats all the rest of this week and next week. I'm going to leave the bridge open for about another minute and a half so that if you want to grab those links from the Zoom chat, you have the time to do so. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everybody has a very happy Thursday.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki.